Hello, and welcome to another show of Between Two Psychs with myself, Adam, and my co host, Mike. Today, we are talking about early years and what's to be done about the provision. We need to recognize, first off, Mike, that early years practitioners really try their best with what's little resource, and we are going to go into how to unpick that a bit more and what can be done to make their jobs more effective and what things are outside of their reach that they just need more support with externally. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And hello to you and to anyone listening. Absolutely. I think, hats off to practitioners in the early years sector, do a tremendous job with very little resource. Yeah, I was thinking about the early years sector and really the challenges that the staff are facing these days and the increase in referrals to educational psychologists to offer cooperative support. I thought, it would be a good idea for us just to spend some time in this podcast considering the referrals we get, the types of advice that would be good to support with inclusion in early years.
For myself, I think I'm in a very privileged position because I have a young boy who's currently in preschool. And as an ed psych, I'm in early settings all the time. So I think that perspective gives me quite an advantage. The thing that always comes to mind is the amount of planning that must go on in order to have a play-based curriculum that is also structured.
Yeah.
They do a phenomenal job, don't they?
Yeah, 100%. They really do. And, the frameworks that are used by early year staff, I personally do like them. I do find them very helpful as an ed psych. And when I'm talking and consulting with staff in the early years settings, I always find that not only is the data and information very valuable, but the added information that comes from the early years staff is great.
Yeah. Tell me a bit more about the added information.
Well, it's what is the connection that early years staff have with the young children, and that's always something that you can't really write about, or you can't necessarily measure through a framework. Is the value of the relationships that are established between children and the adults, the adults and the children really, and how much of an impact that relationship has on the stability of a child. So if we start getting going, I was saying to you beforehand, when I was thinking about this podcast, there's a buzz phrase that sprang to mind, which seems to encapsulate the angle that I take with early years work. And that buzz phrase would be reach before you teach. I know you like that one, Adam.
I do. I like a good buzzword. Connection before correction was another one you threw in a few weeks ago.
That's a good one. I can't claim ownership to that one, but I am going to claim ownership to the reach before you teach. And apologies if somebody says, I got that first. I just didn't know that you got it first. So for now, I'm claiming it.
You came to the same conclusion autonomously.
So the reason I like that is because one of the things that we have to sort of consider together is that children learn best when they feel safe, seen, and supported. And that's so important. Well, that's why this reach before you teach is so important. Adults who are emotionally available become a secure base for children. And we said, I can't remember when, I think it might have been, early days with one of the autism podcasts, but how young children look to be co-regulated before they can self-regulate. And so when they are surrounded by adults who offer them a secure, stable base, it means that when they're dysregulated, they've got a safe place to turn to help them to regulate.
Yeah, I get the sense of safety part. I'm struggling to understand the reach part. Is that an acronym or something else?
Well, the reach is reaching out and building a relationship.
Also, the adult is reaching out in terms of relationship and almost can envisage the child doing their arms up in the air, pick me up type thing. So that's the reach part. So
Well, the reach before you teach, yeah. So you understand the teach bit, I hope.
I do.
Yes.
I'm
So
not
the
brave
reach
enough to
is,
do it.
but the reach bit is, the developing of the relationship before you teach.
Yeah. And I think that's like we always come to the core of our work is to have those relationships in place. And you mentioned about the frameworks that they use, and the early years foundation stage framework is quite a good one, simply because it is developmentally informed. It looks for skills and behaviors the children typically achieve at certain milestones, and that gives practitioners and ourselves a good framework to notice if something's gone wrong or something is not quite developing at the pace it should be. It then gets a bit trickier when they move into formal education.
Yeah.
The thing that comes to mind, though, is although the framework is good, can we say that those practitioners who pour their heart and soul into it get enough support themselves or get access to enough training themselves?
Yes. I don't know the answer. I mean, from conversations that I've had with early years practitioners, there could be a lot more, but I wouldn't have evidence to, substantiate that. But just coming back to the sort of regulation and dysregulation, so a typical type of difficulty that would be referred to me is the challenging behaviour that occurs in a classroom. And the staff are saying that they're not entirely sure what's best to do about that behaviour or what might be causing that behaviour. So have you got any experience working with behavioural referrals in early years?
Yeah, I have, of course. And the one that springs to mind, it's actually a long time ago. And it was one of the only times that a parent anticipated me arriving. Never met the parent before. And they recognized me somehow, probably from my picture. You send out pen portraits before you go and do an assessment. And cornered me in the car park and started asking me all sorts of questions. And I had to politely tell her, I haven't even seen your child yet. But obviously this was coming from a very anxious place about what was to be done about her child. Was this child going to special school or getting the type of support that she felt they needed? And obviously then I went in and seen the child, and that anxiety clearly spilled over into their behavior. And they were, running around, and the staff really struggled to contain them into any sort of dedicated activity or co-learning or even peer-to-peer interaction. And what came about from it was that the child was naturally highly anxious, but there was also communication difficulties in there. And that's one of the things I noticed that comes out a lot in early years, is that quite often there's a language difficulty underpinning things, whereby we can see something as what we in old terms call behavioral, but when we unpick it a bit, it's actually their language needs are quite limited.
Yeah, that's right. And what we're getting into there is what's the function of the behaviour? And, working with the staff is one of the first questions that we'll explore together is what's this behaviour telling us, even though the child can't articulate the challenges that they're experiencing. So looking at ways of trying to interpret behaviour is often constructive. So there are ways of doing that. So the good old fashioned way would be the ABC charts, the antecedent behaviour consequences charts. But the idea, whatever the method is to try and get to the point of understanding what that behaviour is saying. The other thing then is to try and contextualise behaviour within early years development. So one example that I can talk about quite quickly is staff were telling me that a particular child would roll over all the other children. This child was a big child, so it was a concern for them.
You mean physically roll over them?
Yeah. So snoring times and other activities where they're sitting down, the child would roll all over them.
And he's doing his Indiana Jones impression where he's the boulder.
Exactly. through the sort of antecedent behaviour consequence or even the functional behaviour analysis approach, we established child was sensory seeking. So he actually had some proprioceptor and other sensory challenges, which we weren't aware of when we started the initial exploration. We were thinking about whether this child knew what they were doing, or was this child, having very little boundaries, etc. So once we'd identified that through a week of measuring the ABCs, we were able to put an intervention in place which addressed it. So that's why it's so important to try and find what the message is through the behaviour.
And last week we talked about the 3 pillars. We've already touched on 2 of them. We've touched on sensory and language. And I know you want to talk more about relational, that reach. What other ways can practitioners in early year settings nurture that relationship with children? Is it just play-based stuff, or is there more to do?
That's a really good question. I think there's an element of having to find a common area of interest, isn't there? So I would imagine if I was in that sector, one of the first things I'd be doing is understanding from the parents and carers what the child likes, or do they have any really strong interests, and using those as a gateway in to building up some rapport with the child.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'm just thinking about my own son, and he's mad about dinosaurs at the moment. And one of his key worker gets down and does all the sound effects with him. She'll make the roaring sounds and chase after him, and then he'll chase after her, to the point where when he comes home, he'll be talking about her. He'll be saying her name and reenacting the play they've done together.
Yeah.
And to the point where I think she is seen in his world as probably the 3rd or 4th most influential person in his life.
Yeah. And you touched on there the other key thing to answer your first question, which is about play. Because the majority, not all children, but the majority of children do want to engage with others during play. But how important play is to supporting the child's cognitive development and their awareness of themselves. Piaget, I know a lot of people say Piaget is out of date, but there's 2 things that Piaget wrote about, which was assimilation and accommodation. And what happens in play is that the child can start to pretend that they are something or somebody else. And that's them assimilating the behaviours and characteristics of a certain person. It could be a parent or a carer. But then they turn them into something else that means something to them. That's the accommodation. So it's really important that play is brought into the equation of building rapport, not only for rapport reasons, but also because of the impact that it has on a child's development.
I think play is completely underrated in terms of its impact on cognitive development in particular, because it is where children learn not only the social interactive skills, but conceptual skills, how to frame the world. And like if we take my son, for example, the fact that he's playing with dinosaurs, he's learning how dinosaurs interact. He's learning what they look like. He's learning that they're supposedly scary, and that when they do certain actions, you feign a scared feeling. I want to move on to storytelling with certain books. He's very keen on the Julia Donaldson ones, but also even going more classical, the Three Little Pigs. He's able to reenact the big bad wolf, and he'll the house down, and he knows that action and consequence already. He won't articulate like that. Obviously, he's only 2.5, and the thing is, he's able to reenact it. Therefore, he has an appreciation for action and consequence.
Yeah, and that's so important as well with cognitive development, which is why we have the things like the cause and effect toys, and children learning that if they press this, then that happens, or if they lift this, and this comes out. And the reason that's important is because as we get older, we need to start understanding the connection between what we do and the results of what we do. And also the early building blocks to things like problem solving. And as we both know, problem solving is a cognitive task that's incredibly powerful, but in the national curriculum subject will be linked to subjects like mathematics, or the other side of problem solving is the logic, which comes from cause and effect play. And logic can be drawn upon in tasks such as, being able to create a logical order to a story that you're writing. So these elements of play in early years are so important in laying the foundations to later academic development and personal development.
Yeah. And play's vastly underrated. There's a core argument within the psychological world that play should continue up until they're 7 as a core part of the curriculum, if not the largest part of the curriculum. However, I want to move on to, this podcast is always about trying to give strategies to practitioners.
Yeah.
And one that I want to discuss too, but I'll bring this one first, is paired reading. What is the benefit of paired reading? As in, taking, for example, I read Room in the Broom to my son. What does that achieve?
Let's break that down. So sitting together as paired reading, first of all, you're in close proximity to your safe space. So what does that do? Well, we've already, talked about the calm environment and the reach before you teach bit. So you're actually reaching out before you teach.
And it also brings in the polyvagal stuff we've spoken about several times.
Yeah.
The parasympathetic, the calmer you feel, the more you absorb external information.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing with paired reading is that a child starts to learn the consequence of turning a page and the enthusiasm that the adult is sharing about what comes next, in the predictability of the engagement. So, of what do you think is going to happen now type questions is developing cognitive skills to support them in a wider arena.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've got the story itself, which is just great fun.
Yeah, it's a captivating narrative. And if they throw in a few fart jokes and a few butt jokes, then the kids laugh their heads off and everyone's happy.
Yeah. So the good thing about paired reading, particularly at the early years sector, is it's going to be exposing children to what we call the sight words. So words that they don't necessarily have to apply phonetic rules to. So they can quickly start to get confident in being able to rate their own importance and rate their own progress, but have that feel-good factor about themselves. Even at, the early years age, they start to grow in confidence because of success. And obviously parents, carers and staff will be capturing the child recognising a sight word in a book, on a signpost side, beyond in the community, which all feeds into a sense of a feel-good factor about the child.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The next one I want to talk about is the attention bucket. Have you come across this one?
I have. I haven't used it, but I have come across it.
I've seen it done a few times, and when it's done well, it's fantastic. I think it originally came from a crowd called Attention Autism, and they refined it. Maybe it was around longer than that, and it was designed around how to support students or young children with autism to focus more without taking over the play and adapting it to their rules. And the idea is you have a bucket with different toys or different items inside that are interesting. And the adult takes them out and sings a song about them and puts them back in. And then takes out the next item, sings a song about that item and puts it back in. And if the child gets up, they're supposed to sit them back down and then just continue on with the song. And when I first came across, I thought, that seems like a recipe for disaster. But you quickly move from 30 seconds to 1 minute, to 2 minutes, to 3 minutes, and that attention span starts to stretch out. If it's done consistently and nurturingly, if it's done in a punitive way, I don't think it would work. And the benefit, I think, is they're being exposed to a calm adult who is reinforcing the boundary. So regardless of whether you have autism or not, that's always good. And the other thing is you're engaging in an activity that plays to some of the fundamental physiological elements of being a human, i.e., music, singing. I know last week you spoke a lot about physiology, and I think that's an element within it. So it's quite an enjoyable sensory experience, assuming the person could sing. If it was me, it would go down terribly.
And probably for me as well, which is why you and I aren't early years practitioners, maybe. Yeah, it's a good point, and we're talking about things that are unknown to early years staff, but how valuable they are. Another thing that I see is the use of the visual timetables in early years settings, and there's various ways of using it, but the fact it's there and being used is often having a very positive impact on children in the setting. One of the reasons, from my point of view, is that it's the predictability and the security of what's coming next. I know the routine of my day. And that goes back again to the reach before you teach, so ensuring that the person is comfortable and safe and knows their environment. And often with the visual timetable comes the now and next, doesn't it? With trying to support children, like you've just said, with attention and focus. That's a great method of helping children to be independent, but also to engage with something that is adult-led.
Yeah. And staying with the predictability and the visual communication side, where you have children that we alluded to earlier having language difficulties, think about systems like pictorial exchange communication, whereby you have pictures or even objects of reference, where you have pictures representing items or actions within the environment.
Yeah.
Now, the key element with pictorial exchange, I've seen it done really well and I've seen it done not so well. When it's not done well, it's the adult showing them the card and then fulfilling the action. Really, what should be happening is the child taking the card and giving it to the adult. That's what you're aiming for, because then the child is communicating it. They're making a clear, willful effort to say, this is what I want to do. Whereas if it's the adult showing it, it's almost like an instruction. And so some practitioners would say to me, well, how come we haven't seen an improvement in his behavior? It's because it's not a two-way communication street, it's one way. Whereas objects of reference can get around that a bit by showing objects whereby this is what happens in this area. And I think if you can get those types of visual communication strategies in place, particularly for those who you suspect as having language difficulties, you'll see a dampening on the behavior that can be challenging.
Yeah, you can, yeah. Talking about the communication there, Adam, because that is often a real difficult one for staff to deal with. How can I teach a child to do something they can't talk and they can't understand? It really is a barrier to social and academic development, even at the 2-3-year-old age. And my answer to that is that children need to, first of all, learn that communication carries a benefit. There's something in it for them. And, before we can even get into the objects of reference or pictorial exchanges, there's got to be an understanding from the child's point of view that when I do this, it's good for me, it gives me something, it gets me something. And that basic premise can often be overlooked because we do worry that this child needs a method of communication, but it only needs a method when it knows, right, there's something in this for me.
And I don't know if you've realized it, but you brought up another very important point around rewards or the anticipation of rewards. And for most children, the anticipation of rewards is actually a powerful motivating factor to learn. We're having a guest on soon who'll be able to go into much greater depth than I can about this. But neurologically, when you anticipate a reward, you will behave in a pro-social way in order to achieve that. And if that is around learning, then you're more likely to do it. So if what you're saying is about communication gets me something I want or need, then if we give the environment and the structure of the environment to do that, then they're naturally going to become good learners neurologically as well as what we just described as conditionally.
Absolutely, Adam. And we could start to go off on tangents, but just for the benefit of people listening to this, who is that guest? Can you remember who's coming on to talk about that?
Andrew Curran.
Okay. Do you know what date we're seeing, Andrew?
I think it's the 12th of February.
Okay, so it's a couple of weeks, so we'll be releasing that episode around the mid to the end of Feb.
Maybe it's the 13th of February. You got me doubting myself.
Okay. But it's going to be around then, so that if people are interested in tuning in, that's when that one will be released. But just looking at the time, I wanted to just kind of summarise this, but then open it up to people in the early years sector. So we've been talking about the thoughts that education psychologists would have when they are working in the early years sector, and the sorts of very strong strategies that we see when we do work in the early years sector. And in many ways, I think what we're saying through this podcast is you're doing a great job in the early years. From a psychologist's point of view, this is often why the work that you're doing is working. But I wonder if it might be useful to practitioners in the early years sector if they want to send us in any questions that we can actually talk about as a particular focus for an episode. And if they did want to send questions in, Adam, how can they do that?
They can email either you or I at hello@dradamccartney.com, or where can they get you, Mike?
My email is mike@ridgwaypsychology.co.uk. But I think there's also, we share podcasts on LinkedIn, and we can both be contacted through that as well, can't we?
Yeah, you can contact us directly through just typing in our names in LinkedIn and DMing us, or commenting on one of our posts.
That's the way. And we generally release episodes about a week to 2 weeks after they're recorded. So if you do listen to this and you want us to address a particular topic, it would probably be a few weeks later, but we would let you know.
Yeah. Okay, Mike. And on that note, come to a nice, neat ending. All the best. See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.